So much of Kubernetes is configured with YAML that you really need to understand how YAML works, at least in its basic form. And you can see inside of Kubernetes that it's used for things like the configuration, the deployment, services, replica sets, and other things too. Here is an example. We're looking at a configuration, and you can see this is the overall sort of look and feel of a YAML file. So where would you find good information on YAML? And I would recommend that you go to the specification itself, which is this one here. And if you scroll to page 5, you'll see that YAML is a data serialization language designed to be human-friendly and work well with modern computer languages. Notice that it does use Unicode, and you can use indentation, and it does in fact recognize both spaces and tabs. You'll also see early on in the documentation that it introduces data structures, which it calls primitives. They are mapping, sequences, and scalars. And here's what they look like. So a sequence starts with a dash, a mapping starts with a colon, and comments start with a pound sign or a hash. And that's really nicely described here. We have the scalars here, just individual values separated by dashes. And then we have a mapping of scalars, right? So what we just saw, we have a value separated by a colon, another value. And then you have a mapping of scalars to sequences. So here is your scalar, and here is the sequence, actually a series of them. This is a sequence of scalars, all under a single mapping here. And then you have a sequence of mappings. So the sequence, again, starts out with a dash, and then you have your mappings, mapping, mapping, and mapping, each of these being a scalar. Now you might be wondering, why is this dash not indented underneath containers if that's actually what it's used for? But it turns out that the dash is interpreted by people, is perceived by people as indentation, and therefore it's optional to indent from here. YAML uses something that it calls a node, and a node is something that has content of one of the three kinds we just looked at, scalar, sequence, or mapping. YAML also has something called a directive, which is introduced in each what is called a document. So a single file can have multiple documents inside it. And the directive has a name, so it has optional sequence of parameters. There are two directives, there's YAML and there is tags. And the directives are really instructions to the YAML processor. Now, that's useful to know because YAML will use 3 dashes, as you can see here, to separate directives from document content. In practice, it's simply a way of distinguishing this is the first document and this is the second document. And of course, the pound sign indicates a comment which starts or precedes the document. Notice that all of this is likely saved into a single file, and YAML sees it as it comes into its processor as a stream and calls it a stream. Now, YAML also has this idea of nodes, which we just looked at, that you can refer back to using an alias later. When you do this, the first mention of that node is called the anchor, and it's indicated with an ampersand, and the second time you use it, you indicate that with an asterisk. So you would have Sammy Sosa is now associated with star SS, and you don't have to repeat this value. You can also preserve line breaks with this vertical line or the dash symbol. Notice too here that we have 2 separate sequences. They both start with the dash as you would expect, and notice here they are indented underneath this mapping. And of course you see multiple documents on the right here. Notice too that the YAML processor works on behalf of another module, which it calls an application. And you can see you have the application listed here, and you have YAML being interpreted and serialized and presented in this sort of flow.